Hey guys, today we step barefoot into the smoldering soil of Texas, just a few quiet years after the Civil War. The air tastes like iron and regret. You smell old smoke clinging to charred fence posts, the kind of silence that follows cannon fire, and maybe, just maybe, you hear the rustle of cotton bolls no longer picked under a lash. You're in 1870 now, and you're not just passing through. You live here. You're one of the thousands of freedmen, newly unchained, newly uncertain, and walking into a future no one has ever mapped before. You probably won't survive this era with your dignity intact, unless you know how to turn a Confederate coat into something that fits the new you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time you're listening. Midnight in Memphis? 3 a.m. in Johannesburg? Now, the crickets are chirping. Let's begin. You trudge down a dirt path outside Galveston. Your feet are still blistered from yesterday's walk. 6 miles to hear a preacher speak on freedom as faith under a leaning pecan tree. You pass fields half planted. Cotton trying to grow where blood once soaked the roots. No one says it out loud, but this land remembers. The houses are small, mostly shacks and cabins built by hand, sometimes by moonlight, out of lumber no one else wanted. But one thing no one lacks? Rags. And not just any rags, actual Confederate uniforms. Piles of them. Tattered, too short, too long, stiff with sweat and old shame. Dumped behind forts. Abandoned in barns. Sometimes even handed out by ex-soldiers too bitter to care what becomes of them. To some, these are cursed relics, symbols of pain. But to you and your neighbors, there's something else entirely, raw material. It's just cloth now, and cloth means possibility. A woman named Lottie, who used the men's dresses on the Barton plantation, now runs a churchyard circle every Thursday evening. No church, really, just a stump, a lantern, and about 7 people with needle kits made from bone and brass. They sew in rhythm with stories, passing down what they remember and patching it into fabric. You sit beside a man named Jonah. He's already sliced the brass buttons off a jacket and plans to sell them for 2 pennies apiece. Not much, but enough for coffee grounds and soap. He eyes the coat like it owes him something. And maybe it does. Historians still argue whether former Confederate depots in Texas intentionally distributed these uniforms to freedmen as a twisted form of mockery. Some say it was surplus clearance. Others believe it was a quiet dare. Wear this if you dare. But you don't wear it the way they expect. You watch another man, Isaac, dye a coat using blackberry and pecan shell water. It turns a dusky purple-brown. He grins like he's just painted over memory. That coat once marched through Shiloh. Now it walks his daughter to school. Down in San Antonio, word travels of a freedwoman named Marva, who stitches gray trousers into altar cloths. No one kneels on Confederacy, but everyone kneels on grace. There's a rhythm to it, like quilting history in real time. You don't call it rebellion, you call it living. One evening, you find an old sack stuffed with kepis, those round, flat-top Confederate caps. You imagine turning them into toys, or stuffing them with straw for chickens to nest in. Your neighbor suggests turning one into a pincushion and naming it General Regret. And here's a fringe detail few talk about. Some folks believe the fabric held on to spirits, that every jacket came with a ghost. That's why Andy Rue won't let any gray fabric into her house after sunset. She swears one sleeve moved by itself. You chuckle, but later that night, lying on your mat with a borrowed blanket, you do find yourself checking twice for shadows. The landscape you walk through is stitched with contradiction. On one side of the road, there's a Union veteran teaching math to black children. On the other, a former Confederate captain selling tobacco while pretending not to recognize the men he once enslaved. And through it all, you keep sewing. Not just stitches, but identity, memory, resistance. Your fingers bleed from a needle sometimes, and someone jokes that you're just giving the coat a soul. You look down at your first finished piece, a jacket that used to belong to a colonel. You've cut it down, resewn the lapels, added an extra pocket. It fits you now, not just in size, but in spirit. You wear it to the next churchyard gathering, and no one says a word, but they all nod. That night, the stars seem closer than usual. Maybe because you finally claimed something that used to claim you. Maybe because you've made the Confederacy carry your groceries. You wake up with a sore back and the faint scent of smoked cotton still clinging to your blanket. The morning is lazy, slow like molasses in winter, and the sun filters through the wooden slats of your window like it's not entirely sure it wants to be here. And who could blame it? Texas in the 1870s is a place stitched together by contradictions. Freedom promised, but never fully delivered. You shuffle outside, boots unlaced, and head toward the storage shed behind the old blacksmith shop. That's where the latest batch of uniforms was found, piled like forgotten history, left behind in a hurry by men who once believed themselves untouchable. The cloth is stiff, faded, and frayed, but there's still something strong in it, something you can use. Today, you've come with a plan. See, the jacket you wore last week, the one you recut and refitted from a Confederate colonel's coat, well, folks noticed. Not just the stitches, not just the clean lapels. They noticed what it meant, and now they're asking you to help them do the same. You sort through the pile carefully. Most of the pieces are the same. Gray wool, fraying at the seams, stained with years of sweat, gunpowder, and bad decisions. But to you, they're just ingredients. You grab a few tunics, toss aside anything that still smells too much like war, and carry your bundle to the shade of pecan tree where a few friends are waiting. Jonah's already there. He's turned an entire set of Confederate trousers into what might generously be called a pair of Sunday suspenders. They hang a little loose, but he wears them like he invented the look. Gray cloth, new eyes, he says with a grin, and you both laugh. There's an unspoken game in the circle now. Who can transform the past most creatively? Someone's turned an old canteen strap into a shoelace. Another's using rebel sashes as curtain ties. And then there's Mabel, who's been quietly collecting uniform linings, soft, untouched by the outer world, and sewing them into baby blankets. If my child gonna cry, she says, might as well be wrapped in their failure. That line gets a roar of laughter, but it also makes you think. Historians still argue whether Confederate uniforms were distributed to freedmen out of necessity, insult, or indifference. Some say ex-soldiers gave them away just to rid themselves of reminders. Others believe local officials handed them out as a sick joke. But for people like you, none of that matters now. The intentions behind the cloth have been eclipsed by the intentions you sew into it. You kneel beside the others and begin to work. The fabric is coarse but familiar. Your hands move in rhythm, remembering the way your grandmother used to patch the knees of trousers before Sunday dinner. Back when the only cloth you had came from cast-offs, and you learned to love what was stitched in silence. It's hard not to notice how the fabric fights you sometimes, as if it doesn't want to become something new. But you're patient. You unpick seams slowly, whispering little jokes to yourself. At one point, you find a name tag sewn into a cuff. R. Wilcox, 7th Infantry. You pause, wonder what he was like. Did he survive? Did he know his coat would one day wrap a black man's shoulders on his way to a Juneteenth celebration? You tuck the tag into your pocket, not out of sentiment, but because someone someday might want to know that Wilcox didn't get the last word. Across town, you hear music, a slow banjo tune floating down the breeze, tangled with birdsong and distant hammering. It's probably Elijah. He's been working on a new shack roof using repurposed uniform belts as strapping. Someone once said that freedom wasn't loud. It was patient, stubborn. You believe that more each day. By noon, the heat turns unbearable. Sweat pools in your collar, and the cloth in your hands grows damp and heavy. You move into deeper shade. Someone brings you sweet water in a tin cup, and you take a long sip before noticing the cup is lined with brass buttons. Repurposed, polished, still warm from the sun. And then you see him. A tall man walking slowly down the dirt road, wearing a Confederate jacket dyed deep blue. Sleeves rolled, collar raised. It fits him like it was made for him. Because it was. You don't recognize him, but you know what he's saying just by the way he walks. He passes by without a word, but you hear whispers ripple behind him. And nods. Always the nods. Not everyone approves of this repurposing. Of course, a few older folks, especially those who saw brothers hang in those same colors, refuse to touch the cloth. Aunt Lottie still spits every time someone mentions gray wool. To her, it's not just fabric, it's memory. And memory doesn't always want to be softened. But the younger folks, they're learning to see potential where others saw only pain. And maybe that's what freedom really is. The chance to choose what something means to you now, not what it meant to someone else before. You sit back, wipe your hands, and hold up your finished work, a long vest with slanted pockets and a slightly crooked hem. It's not perfect, but it's yours, entirely yours. And when you put it on, it doesn't feel like a borrowed identity anymore. It feels like a beginning. You're back on a pecan tree by late afternoon, a slight breeze rustling the leaves above like a lazy applause. The stitching has slowed. Your fingers are sore, your back stiff from hunching. But nobody's in a hurry. That's the rhythm now. Everything here moves at the pace of healing. And you're not alone. Around you, others sit cross-legged in the dirt or on upturned crates. The air smells faintly of charcoal and honeysuckle. Someone hums a hymn with no words, just soft vibrations that seem to patch the air itself. Today, a new face joins the circle. His name's Elijah Thomas, and he's just arrived from East Texas. Tall, quiet, with a scar near his jaw that he doesn't explain, and you don't ask. He carries with him a bundle wrapped in a flour sack. When he opens it, the group leans in. Inside are 3 Confederate coats, tattered yes, but still intact. The last one is different though, gray with deep red trim. A sash attached, slightly bloodstained. You all recognize it immediately. That was an officer's coat, someone high-ranking, someone who had orders to give and power to take. Elijah holds it up like a question. No one says anything at first. Then Mabel mutters, "That thing's got ghosts in it." He smiles, but only a little. "No, ma'am," he says, "just thread and threadbare ideas." And with that, he sits down, draws a blade from his pocket, and slices the coat clean down the back. You've never heard silence that loud. He starts separating pieces carefully, muttering about lining, dart seams, reinforcement panels. The man knows his stitching, but it's the way he works that quiets everyone. Like he's not just unmaking a coat, but undoing a whole season of sorrow. As he works, you ask him where he got the sash. "Found it nailed to a church door," he says, not looking up. "Guess someone didn't want it anymore." He gives the fabric a quick tug, rips off the shoulder epaulette, and tosses it into the fire pit nearby. Flame accepts it gladly. There's something healing in watching that coat fall apart. And then, like all great stories, someone tries to outdo it. A young man named Rufus, barely 16, stands up and clears his throat. "Well," he says, "I turn a whole uniform into my wedding suit." Gasps, laughter, and one older woman slaps her knee. "You didn't," she says. "Oh, I did," Rufus replies proudly. "Used the sash as a cummerbund. Buttons too. Told my bride I was marrying her and bearing the past at the same time." You can't help but laugh. But deep down you feel something shift. That red sash, so symbolic of rank and war, became part of someone's beginning. Historians still debate whether these creative repurposings were conscious acts of protest or simply necessity dressed in creativity. The answer, of course, lies somewhere between both, and varies by who's holding the needle. You glance around the circle and see it differently now. These aren't just survival tactics. They're acts of quiet rebellion. They're reclaiming, reframing, restitching reality one thread at a time. And then comes a story from Jonah, who always saves the best for last. He once met a man, he says, who used Confederate sash to wrap the handle of his walking stick. Every time he leaned on it, Jonah grins. He leaned on their failure. The group erupts in laughter, and even the nearby hens flap in protest. But humor is just another kind of glue. You need it. As twilight sets in, fireflies drift lazily between the trees. Someone lights a lantern, but no one really needs it yet. You're all sitting close enough now to see the glint in each other's eyes. You finish another vest a day, this one from a mix of jacket sleeves and what might have been a bedroll strap. It fits better than the last one. Cleaner lines, straighter seams. But it's not just the vest that's new. You feel something steadier now. Not just resistance. Confidence. That officer's coat, now reduced to scraps beside Elijah's feet, somehow feels smaller than it did this morning. It has no power here. Not anymore. Later that evening, as folks pack up their work and fold away their cloth, you notice something. No one refers to the uniforms as Confederate anymore. They call them gray cloth, old coats, scraps, patches. The names have changed. And names are power. You stretch, stand, and tuck your new vest under your arm. The fire's burning low, and someone starts humming again, this time a tune from childhood. You can't quite place it, but your body remembers. You walk home under a heavy sky full of stars, and you realize something strange. You're not trying to forget what the cloth was. You're proving what it can never be again. Morning rolls in slowly, like a blanket being drawn across the sky. You wake to the sound of chickens arguing beneath your window, and the smell of cornbread left too long on a skillet. The vest you made yesterday hangs by the door, waiting patiently like an old friend. You touch the fabric and think, not of soldiers or battlefields, but of laughter, of Mabel's baby blankets and Rufus's wedding sash. The ghosts are still there, sure, but they've learned to sit quietly. Today's different. You're heading to Waco. There's word of a gathering, a Juneteenth celebration, mixed with a makeshift market. You sling your bundle over your shoulder, tuck a few stitched handkerchiefs into your vest pocket, and start walking. The road's long, dusty, and pocked with mule tracks, but the air smells like promise. About halfway there, you spot something unusual. A man, tall, grizzled, and barefoot, is walking in the opposite direction, crailing a banjo and wearing what appears to be a Confederate sash around his waist. Bright red, slightly faded, and cinched with an old shoelace. He tips his chin in greeting. Heading to Patch Fair? He asks. Juneteenth, you answer. He grins. Thought so. You look like you made your own pride. And just like that, he's gone. Waco is busy by the time you arrive. Stalls made from crates and bed sheets line the dirt square. Smells of smoked catfish, boiled peanuts, and sweet tea mixed with dust and sweat. Children dart between legs, and someone's trying to convince a goat to wear a bonnet. But your eyes land on a man near the center. A preacher, maybe, or just someone who likes to talk louder than others. He's holding up a long red sash and telling a story. It belonged to a Confederate major, he claims, worn in 2 battles, stained with mud, blood, and regret. Now it's been sewn into a stole, draped over his shoulders like a pastor's robe. You wear the cloth of the past, he says, but you do not bow to it. The crowd nods, some laughing, others wiping their eyes. That's when you spot her, a woman, maybe in her late 40s, standing under the shade of an awning. She's examining one of your handkerchiefs. You make your way over, slowly, unsure if you should say anything. That yours? She asks without looking up. You nod. She folds a cloth, smooths the corner, and says, I buried my husband in a coat like this. You don't know what to say. I hated it at first, she continues. Hated seeing that color. But now I wonder, maybe the fabric don't get to decide what it means. She buys 2 handkerchiefs and walks away without another word. You sit down behind your little table and take a long breath. Across the square, a man starts playing the fiddle, joined by a washboard and someone banging a tin pot like a drum. Laughter rises like steam. 2 boys chase each other, wearing what looks suspiciously like Confederate jackets turned into superhero capes. One shouts, General Freedom, before tripping over a chicken. You make a sale, then another. A child points to your vest and says, Mama, you look important. You smile and tell her, only on Sundays. Later in the afternoon, a friend you haven't seen in months stops by. Samuel, who once built wagons in Fort Worth. He's dressed sharp today, wearing a long coat that, if you squint, still carries the outline of an old uniform. But he's trimmed it, added patches, lined it with bright yellow cloth. It sways when he walks like it belongs on a stage. He grins, gives you a half hug, and says, You hear about the man with the sash wedding gift? You nod. Well, he says, You're about to hear another one, and he points. There, At the far edge of the square, a couple is standing hand in hand under a tree. The man's wearing a gray vest with red trim. The woman's holding a bouquet made entirely of fabric scraps. Gray, blue, white, all stitched into something beautiful. As the preacher from earlier walks up to marry them, a hush falls over the crowd. No organ, no grand stage. Just quiet, just sunlight through leaves and the whisper of new beginnings. You stand without meaning to, the vest warm against your shoulders. The preacher raises his hands. May your love be sewn stronger than any thread, and may your days outlast the past that try to shape you. Someone sniffles. Probably you. Historians might debate whether Juneteenth in those early years was about resistance or remembrance. But standing here, barefoot in Texas soil, you know the answer. Both. The ceremony ends with applause and cheers. The couple kisses, and two kids throw bits of cotton like confetti. Someone shouts, "Now that's a real rebel yell." And everyone laughs, not cruelly but joyously, reclaiming the phrase like they've done with everything else. You stay until the sun begins to dip. Trade 3 vests, gain a pocket knife, and a story from a man who claims to have sewn a flag into a fishing net. You believe him. Why wouldn't you? When you finally leave, your bundle is lighter, but your spirit isn't. The sash, the coat, the vest, they were never just about fabric. They were about turning weight into wings. The road back home is quieter than before. Dust settles behind your boots like a slow exhale. The celebration in Waco still hums in your chest. Music, laughter, that strange bouquet of patchwork petals, and that red sash, stitched into someone's wedding story, follows you like a trailing thread of hope. By the time you return, dusk has dimmed the sky to a soft indigo. The fireflies are out again, blinking like shy lanterns. You sit on your front step, pull off your boots, and let the coolness of the earth soothe your tired feet. You think about the red sash, not the one in Waco, but the one still folded at the bottom of your work basket. You found it weeks ago. Torn, stiff with time, and too faded to be flashy. You didn't know what to do with it, so you left it alone. Tonight, you spread it across your lap. It smells like old cedar and something else, maybe ink, maybe pride. Carefully, you begin to fold it, not to hide it away, but to prepare it. Tomorrow it will become something new, but not tonight. Tonight, the neighbors gather again, not to sew this time, but to burn. At the edge of the clearing, just past the corn rows, someone has built a bonfire. Old fence posts, broken chair legs, and in the center, a tall stack of Confederate garments. Coats, hats, trousers, all too damaged to mend, too haunted to keep. There's no speech, no banner, just matches. Someone lights the edge, and flames leap with eager hunger. You watch as the fabric curls and blackens. Buttons pop. Smoke rises. It smells sharp, lanolin and dye and history trying to escape. You stand with the others in silence. The fire painting flickers across your faces. No one says revenge. No one says forgiveness. You don't need to. Burning these things isn't erasing history. It's reminding it who's in charge now. Historians still argue whether these bonfires were common or isolated. Some say they were acts of protest. Others of purification. One scholar once called them emancipation rituals in disguise. But to you, it's just cleaning house. Mabel tosses in a sash with a floral trim. Used to hang in my uncle's store window, she mutters. I'd rather have a clear conscience than a keepsake. A little boy throws in a kepi and watches it sizzle, eyes wide. His father stands behind him, one hand on his shoulder. As the fire grows, someone begins to play the banjo again. Slow, steady chords. The kind of music that doesn't demand anything from you, just your breath. And then the dancing begins. At first, it's hesitant. One woman sways in place. Then another joins her. Then Jonah claps once, twice, and starts a slow shuffle that earns a round of chuckles. You find yourself tapping your foot, then stepping forward. And before you know it, you're part of it. Spinning gently beneath a smoke-streaked sky, gray ashes rising like ghosts finally leaving home. You dance not to forget, but to remember your power. Someone hands you a piece of cornbread wrapped in a strip of uniform lining. You grin. We're seasoning everything with history now. You joke. Only the good parts, she replies. Later, as the fire dies and the crowd thins, you stay behind to stir the coals. One last ember glows like a buried ruby. You toss in a single brass button. It lands with a hiss, and the ember gives a final flicker. You feel lighter. Back home, you lay the red sash out again. Folded, smooth, waiting. It'll be a belt. No, a trim for a collar. Or maybe a ribbon for a gift. You don't need to know yet. That's the point. The future isn't something you wait for. It's something you make, stitch by stitch, spark by spark. The next morning arrives with a quiet clarity. The kind of blue sky that feels freshly scrubbed. The kind that makes the chickens cluck with extra sass. You stretch your shoulders, roll your neck, and sip slow from your tin cup of chicory brew. The red sash waits on the table beside you, folded like a question still waiting to be answered. Today is a quilting day. You head to Miss Nella's place, just past the well, behind the blackberry hedges that somehow always stain your sleeve, no matter how careful you are. Her porch is wide, her voice is louder, and her quilts? Legendary. She doesn't sell them, doesn't trade them. She calls them memory blankets, and gives them only to those who've earned a story. You walk in carrying a bundle of cuttings, scraps from old gray coats, a few blue linings from union donations, even one green swatch that used to be part of feed sack. She grins when she sees the red sash tucked in. Finally ready to talk to it? She says, half teasing. You shrug. Might be it wants to be a boarder. Miss Nella nods, already threading her needle. Around her sit 4 women and 2 men, all hunched in that quilting huddle posture that says business is about to be stitched. Each person has a pile of fabric and story, and each quilt square becomes a kind of quiet testimony. Yours begins in the corner, a triangle of gray wool from an old colonel's jacket. You stitch it next to a strip of bright yellow from a sharecropper's apron. The thread is mismatched, black on the yellow, white on the gray, but that's how Miss Nella likes it. If the seams don't show, she says, then who knows how long it took to hold things together? You work quietly, listening as Mabel recounts her brother's escape to Kansas, using the stars and a map drawn on a quilt just like this. She points to a pattern, a swirl of triangles, and says, that's the bear paw. Meant, head north, walk carefully. Quilting, you learn, isn't just craft. It's code. Some patterns whisper safe routes. Some honor the dead. Some celebrate birth, marriage, planting seasons. And others are just for the joy of color stitched across hardship. You pause and hold up a strip of faded red, your sash. Should I cut it? Miss Nella looks up slowly. Don't ask me, ask the cloth. You don't laugh because in this place, it's not a joke. You hold it close, run your thumb along the grain. It feels firm, like it remembers what it once was, but it doesn't resist the scissors. Not this time. Snip. You cut it into 4 even strips. Each becomes a border around one of your gray panels. Like a frame. Like punctuation. Jonah, sitting nearby, leans over and mutters, it's funny. That color used to mean blood. Now it just means finish. Historians still debate how widespread these cold quilts were. Some argue most were simply practical warmth. Others insist entire resistance movements were stitched into bedspreads. The truth, as always, lies tangled between certainty and survival. Miss Nella finishes a square and lays it flat. It's a perfect mess. Union blue, Confederate gray, Sunday white linen, and a square of yellow gingham right in the center. That was my daughter's, she says softly. Wore it the day she first voted. The room stills. You add another patch to your quilt. A small corner made from what used to be a rebel sash, but now holds your initials, embroidered clumsily but with heart. When you look at the square as a whole, it doesn't shout. It hums, like a lullaby sung in a storm. The day passes in threads and stories. Someone brings lunch, salt pork and greens. Someone else brings peach preserves. You stitch, eat, stitch again, and every once in a while, pause to breathe and smile. By late afternoon, your section is done. Miss Nella collects each square, lays them out across the floor, and begins arranging. It's like a mosaic made of memory. A battlefield reimagined as a bedspread. A funeral turned festival. You spot your sash pieces, no longer loud, no longer bloody, just part of the whole. Funny thing, Miss Nella says, but a quilt's like a town. Every patch matters, even the ugly ones, especially them. The group laughs, soft and knowing. You roll your square up carefully, tie it with a string, and tuck it under your arm. As you head home, you think about what this cloth has seen, about how it traveled from battlefield to bonfire, from shame to stitch, from power to pillow. You stop by the well, rinse your hands, and sit for a moment on the old bench where the shadows fall long. You're tired, but it's a good tired, because today, you didn't just remember history. You rewrote it, one patch at a time. The next morning breaks with a sharp brightness, the kind that turns tin rooftops into mirrors and makes you blink even before your second breath. You wake to the soft crackle of cotton shirts dry on the line, and through your window, you catch sight of Mabel already in her garden, pruning okra in her quilted apron, the same one she stitched from the sleeve of a Confederate overcoat. Funny, you think, that coat once walked a battlefield. Now it gathers vegetables. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and reach for the quilt square you finished yesterday. The fabric still holds a faint scent of wood smoke and Miss Nella's lemon balm tea. You run your fingers along the seams, half proud, half worried it's not neat enough. But then again, the seams aren't supposed to be perfect. They're supposed to be honest. Today's task is simpler, quieter. No big gatherings. No fire. Just you, your needle, and a small pile of buttons. Brass ones. You found them tucked inside the lining of an old jacket you've been meaning to tear apart. Shined up, they gleam like coins, tiny suns in your palm. Some still have eagles on them. Others, stars. A few carry letters. CSA. You stare at one a little longer than you mean to, and then you put it down. You've heard stories. How some folks melt these down, make cufflinks, hat pins, trinkets for sale. Others bury them in the fields, believing they bring fertility. A few old-timers even wear them on chains, so the dead stay close but under control. As Uncle Vernon used to say, today, you plan to make something simpler. A toy. There's a boy down the road, Josiah, 6 years old, full of questions and grass stains. His mother's been sick, and you figure he could use a gift. So you gather some fabric scraps, some stuffing, and 6 of the brightest buttons, and you get to work. It starts with a rough oval for the body, then arms, a head, stitched on eyes made of blue thread, and finally the buttons, 3 down the chest, 1 on each foot, and 1 on the back for good luck. You call it Button Man. Not very creative, but then again, neither was naming a confederacy after the idea of running away. When you hand it to Josiah later that afternoon, he studies it with the seriousness only a child can summon. Then he smiles wide and missing teeth and hugs it tight. His boots click, he says, shaking it. The brass buttons tap, tap, tap on the dirt. Yep, you say, marches wherever you tell him. That night, as the sun falls down behind the trees, you walk by the small graveyard near the creek. It's simple, wooden markers, a few stones, wildflowers growing as they please. You pass a familiar name and stop. Someone, maybe family, has placed a row of Confederate buttons on the grave like coins for Sharon. You tilt your head. You don't take them. But you do wonder who decided that was a proper tribute. Historians still argue whether black families in the South ever repurposed such symbols at burial sites. Some suggest it was mockery. Others claim it was reclamation. Most records stay silent on the matter, like the buttons themselves, saying nothing but glinting in the light. You reach into your pocket and pull out one final button. You hold it for a moment, warm from your hand, then press it gently into the soil near the roots of a wild violet. Not as tribute, as a reminder. Some nights, you sit by your window and string buttons together into wind chimes. They clink softly in the breeze, tiny echoes of uniforms long since turned to dust. The neighbors say they like the sound. It's peaceful, one says, almost like the past trying to apologize. You don't argue. But later, lying in bed, listening to the faint clatter of metal and wind, you think, maybe it's not the past apologizing. Maybe it's you, forgiving yourself for carrying it so long. The next morning dawns cloudy, a slow rolling gray that makes everything feel softer, quieter, as if the sky itself needs a minute to wake up. You wrap yourself in a shawl stitched from flannel scraps and sit on the porch, watching dew beat up on the fence rails. It's the kind of day that doesn't ask anything of you. Just be still. Just breathe. But then Jonah walks by with a shovel over his shoulder, nodding toward the cemetery path. Coming. You nod before you even know why. Down near the old sycamore grove, there's a stretch of ground that never had proper markers. During the war and the years that followed, graves were dug fast, often with no names, no dates, just dirt and grief. It's become something of a tradition now. A small group of neighbors meets there once or twice a year to clean the space, plant something green, and more recently, add buttons. You reach the grove by midday. The air smells like wet earth and cedar. Mabel's already there, arranging a bouquet of honeysuckle and sage. Josiah sits cross-legged beside her, button man in his lap, one foot now missing a button. You make a mental note to repair it later. Today's project isn't sewing. It's setting stones and buttons. You kneel beside Jonah and help him dig a shallow trench. Not for a grave, but for a marker. A simple flat stone newly carved with initials someone found in an old Bible margin. MT 1864. No one knows who he was. But he's here, and he deserves more than silence. As you clear the soil, your fingers graze something small and metallic. A button, round, brassy, with a faint star etched into it. You hold it up. Jonah whistles. Confederate cavalry, he says. Fancy one. You wipe it clean on your sleeve, then place it beside the stone. Not to honor the uniform, but to mark the person. Whoever MT was, the button belonged to him, and now it belongs to memory. Others follow your lead. One woman places a row of tiny silver buttons at the base of a tree, each one representing a name lost to family records. A boy drops in a hand-drawn sketch of a quilt square. Even the preacher shows up, dressed in a jacket you're fairly certain used to be a Union coat, now dyed deep brown with added embroidery that spells mercy. He lays down a single pearl button and says nothing. You find yourself thinking about how buttons carry weight, not in ounces, but in meaning. They're the last things people touch when dressing. The first things they fiddle with when nervous. The little anchors that hold everything together until they pop off and disappear between floorboards or fall into grave dirt or get sewn into wind chimes on porches. Historians still debate whether repurposing military button for graves was symbolic, accidental, or practical. Some say it reflected a scarcity of materials. Others argue it became a way to subvert honor, taking the symbols of war and making them servants to peace. You lean back against a tree, stretching sore shoulders, and catch sight of Miss Nella approaching with something wrapped in cloth. She kneels beside the largest stone and unwraps it, revealing a small brass plaque she's made from melted buttons and scrap metal. Etched into it, in rough but elegant letters, are the words, "What was meant to divide has now been sewn into us." Someone reads it aloud. Someone else exhales like they've been holding their breath for years. You all sit there a while, not talking, not planning, just being. The wind picks up slightly. The branches above sway with a creaking gentleness, and somewhere nearby, a bird sings a high, wandering tune. You don't recognize the melody, but you hum along anyway. Eventually, Jonah stands. "Time to eat," he says. Even sorrow needs a supper break. Everyone chuckles, and the moment dissolves gently into movement. You follow the others back toward town, your steps slow, thoughtful. At the edge of the grove, you turn and glance back. The stone glints faintly. The buttons catch the light. They aren't trophies. They aren't relics. They're reminders that even the smallest things can carry the weight of memory and still shine when the light hits just right. You spend the next day indoors, not out of laziness, but because rain has finally found its way to Texas again. A soft, soaking kind. The kind that taps gently on tin roofs and makes the whole world smell like wet cotton and distant thunder. You're seated by the window, watching rivulets chase each other down the glass, when you notice the basket at your feet, half full with fabric, thread, and something odd poking out beneath a pile of linings. A Confederate kepi, flat-topped, slightly dented, still holding its shape after all these years. You pick it up like it might crumble, but it doesn't. It holds firm. A stubborn little ghost. You found it behind an old store months ago, stuffed with acorns and a note that simply read, "Don't let it win." You meant to do something with it. Anything, really, but you hadn't yet. Until now. You set it on the table. The rain keeps falling. You light a lamp, pull out your sewing kit, and begin to brainstorm. It's an awkward shape. Not much fabric to cut. The inner lining smells like cedar and dust. The brass insignia is still there, barely visible now. You turn it in your hands. Look at it from above, from the side, from every angle you can think of, and then it hits you. You'll make it into a pouch. Not for weapons or maps, but for fishing lures. You laugh out loud at the idea. The kepi, once worn by someone who likely never wanted you to fish freely or vote or own land, will now help you catch dinner. That's worth more than revenge. That's justice served with a hook. You strip out the inner lining, clean the brim, and reinforce the side with a patch of quilted denim. You sew a button from a graveyard collection onto the front as a clasp, then line the inside with burlap, so hooks don't snag the wool. It's not elegant, but it's functional, and it feels good. You take it to the creek that afternoon, the rain finally slowing to a drizzle. The water is high, moving fast. The cattails are bending low, whispering old songs. You bait your line, cast out, and set the pouch beside you on the bank like an old companion. A fish bites almost instantly. A slippery, speckled thing that flops with more indignation than fear. You chuckle, drop it in a bucket, and cast again. Soon, you're joined by others. Jonah arrives with a pole made from broom handle and a line wrapped around a nail. He sits beside you without a word, then opens his own makeshift pouch. It's made from the sleeve of a uniform coat, dyed green, with a carved bone toggle for a closure. "What's that made of?" you ask. "Regret," he says, grinning. "And flour sack." A few kids show up, too. One of them uses a former Confederate boot as a bait bucket. He's painted it blue and added "Freedom Fish" in crooked letters down the side. It leaks, but no one seems to care. The creek becomes a chorus of quiet laughs and tangled lines. Someone tells a joke about a rebel ghost who can't get anyone to iron his uniform. Someone else hums a hymn that skips every third note. And amid it all, your kepi pouch rests beside you, holding hook's line and a tiny compass that doesn't quite point north anymore. Historians rarely write about these moments. They talk about Reconstruction laws, Freedmen's Bureau records, land disputes, but not the kepi pouches, not the fishing trips, not the way a hat once worn to signify superiority now serves catfish and conversation. But maybe that's the point. These aren't grand victories. They're quiet ones, daily ones, the kind you can carry in your pocket, or hook to your belt, or hand down to a child without ever having to explain what it used to be. You catch 2 more fish before sundown, enough for supper. On your way home, you stop by Mabel's and hand off one. "For the baby," you say. She raises an eyebrow. "You sure this isn't a bribe to avoid another quilting circle?" You both laugh. When you finally return home, you hang the kepi pouch on a nail by the door. It sways slightly, still smelling faintly of the creek and distant gunpowder. But mostly it smells like peace, and that's something worth keeping. The next few days pass in a rhythm that feels almost like healing. You mend a pair of boots, help fix a neighbor's fence, and finish lining the inside of your vest with checker cloth that used to be a picnic blanket. But it's Sunday now, church day, and that means putting on your best. You reach for your vest, the one with the red sash trim and mismatched buttons. You give a quick shake, brush off a bit of lint, and slide it over your shoulders. The seams hug your frame just right. You look in the mirror and think, "I built this." Then you pull out the final touch, the reworked kepi pouch. Not to bring, just to hold for a second. Feel the weight of something old turned useful. You leave it hanging by the door, like a small trophy no one will ask about. You make your way to the church house. It's more shed than steeple. One long bench split down the middle, no pulpit, and a plank floor that creaks with every prayer. But it's full full of voices, full of family, full of fabric telling stories even before the mouths open. They come in dressed in history. One woman wears a shawl made from a Confederate bedroll, dyed lavender and embroidered with her initials. A boy skips in with a jacket whose sleeves are clearly too long. He'll grow into them. An old man clutches a walking cane wrapped in leather from an old cavalry saddlebag. And then there are the vests. You count 6, maybe 7, stitched from uniform coats, each unique in color and cut. One has pockets lined in bright orange corduroy. Another's back panel is made from repurposed feed sacks printed with flower brands. They stand out, but not in a loud way, more like punctuation marks in a sermon that hasn't been spoken yet. You take your seat quietly, nodding to folks as they notice your vest. Some nod back, others just smile, knowing this is how you wear your story now, not on your face, but on your thread. The preacher starts, voice smooth as molasses and twice as deep. He doesn't mention clothes. Doesn't need to. But every now and then, his gaze lingers on those of you stitched in rebel gray. You carry the past, he says, but you are not bound by it. Heads nod. Someone hums in agreement. And you think back to something Miss Nella said, even the ugly patches matter. Then, during announcements, it happens. A woman in the second row stands and points, not rudely, just directly, at your vest. You made that from the gray, didn't you? You nod. My brother wouldn't let us keep any of that. Burned every bit. She pauses. But now I wonder if maybe sewing it could have been better than setting a flame. You don't know what to say. So you just say, it helped me stand up straighter. She smiles. Then maybe that's how we rise. Historians still argue whether this kind of repurposing was embraced in black churches after the war. Some say it was frowned upon, associations too fresh, wounds too open. Others believe it was quietly accepted, even respected, so long as the meaning was remade alongside the material. As the service ends, the preacher invites everyone to a community supper next Sunday and adds, where your stories, if you got 'em, that gets a laugh. Afterward, you step out into the sun. It's hot already, but the kind of heat that feels earned, like a good day's work. Jonah joins you with a slow grin. He said, where your stories, he repeats. You think we should sew names into our sleeves? You shrug, only if we've earned them. You walk together past a line of horses and wagons, down toward the big oak that shades the cemetery trail. You pause there. You both come to appreciate the stillness. It doesn't ask anything of you. It just holds you where you are. That's when you see them. A group of kids marching up the road, led by Josiah, button man swinging from his belt like a general's saber. But it's not the toy that makes you smile. It's their hats. Each one of them wears a Confederate kepi, cut and dyed, some with feathers, others with ribbons or flowers. One boy's added bottle caps to the brim. They don't look like soldiers. They look like something new. Mock parade? Jonah asks. Probably. And just as you say it, the kids begin to march in crooked lines, lifting their knees high and saluting every chicken they pass. You and Jonah double over laughing. Mabel leans out her door and shouts, don't let them salute the preacher's goat again. But it's too late. The goat bows. It's absurd, beautiful, necessary. They're not mocking war. They're mocking the idea that it still holds power over them. That night, as you lay your vest across the chair and pull a light quilt over your legs, you think about the phrase, where your story. You've never believed in ghosts, not really. But if they do exist, you hope they're watching now, quiet, humbled, maybe even amused. Because in this new world, even a child with a crooked hat can outshine a whole army. You wake the next day to the sound of laughter and the smell of something frying. It's a Tuesday, technically a work day, but after what those children pulled yesterday with their mock parade and saluting the preacher's goat, nobody's treating it like a regular week. Word has gotten out. Apparently, someone from the next county heard about the March of the Kepi Kids, as it's now called, and they're bringing their own group to challenge Josiah and his crew. A showdown of silliness, you assume, but in truth, it's something far more layered. You pull on your trousers, grab a biscuit, and head toward the square, where the so-called drill is set to take place. You've tucked two small Confederate kepis under your arm, both recently dyed teal and stitched with sunflower emblems. Gifts, you suppose, for whoever needs a bit of rebellion softened by joy. By the time you arrive, the scene is chaos, but in the best way. Children from both counties, 20 or more, are lined up in formations that could only be described as imaginatively terrible. Hats too big, sashes dragging, boots flopping off mid-step. One boy carries a broomstick wrapped in red cloth like a flag. A girl wears a full vest backward, smiling like she owns the sun. But what stops you cold is the presence of the adults. They're not just watching, they're participating. One man, Barlow, you think his name is wearing a cape made entirely of gray uniform pieces, sewn together like feathers on a great bird. He waves at the crowd with brass-buttoned glove and shouts, "This is General Chickenheart, reporting for duty." Everyone roars. Then comes Ruthin, the baker's wife, riding side saddle on a mule dress and patchwork saddlecloth made from, yes, you guessed it, Confederate trousers. Her parasol has been dyed Union blue with stitched stars along the edge. She twirls it like a general's baton. The band begins. Banjo, washboard, fiddle, even a jug or two. And the march begins. But it's not a march of pride. It's a march of parody. Of healing. The kids strut, salute livestock, tumble theatrically into grass when someone yells, "Enemy fire!" Chickens scatter. Laughter echoes. And your face hurts from smiling. You find a seat on a crate beside Jonah, who's busy taking notes on the best costume ideas for next time. This right here, he says, is how you stitch up a soul. And you believe him. Historians still argue whether public mockery of Confederate symbols was common among freed communities. Official records are scarce, partly due to deliberate erasure, and partly because joy is rarely documented as an act of resistance. But in this moment, there's no doubt in your mind. This is protest. This is freedom. This is power disguised as play. After the mock drill ends, prizes are handed out. Cornbread muffins, cloth scraps, a can of blackstrap molasses. Josiah wins Best Hat Reconstruction, though his kepi now has 3 brims and no crown. He seems delighted. You quietly hand off your 2 teal kepis to a pair of twins who couldn't afford hats. Their eyes light up like lanterns, and one of them hugs you without a word. A woman nearby asks if you'll teach a class on creative costume resistance. You laugh, but she's serious. You tell her, maybe, but only if y'all promise to outdo me. That night, over supper, fried fish, thanks to yesterday's Lucky Creek. You jot down a few notes in your journal. You've never kept one before, but lately, there's too much beauty to trust a memory alone. You write, "We march with chickens. We rewrote uniforms into laughter. We were generals of joy." Then you underline it twice. Outside, the sky begins to roll with thunder again, but it doesn't feel threatening. It feels like a drum roll for something new. You sit by the window, sipping warm tea, watching rain beat along the porch rail. From the nail near the door, your vest hangs next to the kepi pouch, both gently sway in the breeze like 2 flags from a battle that was never really won, but never quite lost either. And in that motion, in that whisper cloth, you hear something steady, a promise that every time someone laughs in a stolen hat or stitches a sash into silliness, history gets a little less heavy. The next morning, you find a note pinned to your door with a bone button. It reads in neat, looping script, "We need your help. Bring thread and good boots." No name, just the mark of the button circle. Your neighborhood's informal sewing kin, made up of folks who know that cloth can carry more truth than a sermon. You tuck the note into your pocket, grab your kit, and lace your boots slow and sure. You don't know what you're walking into, but you do know it'll involve stories and sharp needles. You find them gathered under the sycamore tree outside the schoolhouse. Miss Nella's there naturally. So is Jonah with his satchel of salvage. Mabel has brought every child from her house, along with a wagon filled with clothes too worn to fix and too familiar to throw away. "We're making a banner," Nella says, eyes bright. "A quilt?" you ask. She shakes her head. "No, child. A banner. For the schoolhouse wall. For the future." And with that, she pulls out a long, Wide piece of canvas, pale and blank like a quiet morning. We'll stitch in stories, she says. Names, years, places, maybe even jokes. It'll hang for generations to see what we did with our scraps. You set to work immediately. First comes the sorting. Old sleeves, linings, patches, scraps with initials, even fabric from bonnets and old hymn book covers. Everyone adds something. Everyone has something to let go of. You choose a small square from one of the first Confederate coats you ever altered. The fabric's thin with time, but it still holds. You cut it into the shape of a lantern and stitch it to the left side of the banner. For the light we found, you murmur. Nearby, Jonah sews in a strip of denim from his father's trousers, once sharecropped thin, now dyed indigo and sewn like a river across the banner. Mabel embroiders a word, free-ish, in bright green thread. When someone chuckles at the word, she looks up and says, "It's honest." And that's a kind of freedom, too. One boy, barely 10, adds a year 1870 in crooked stitches beside a patch from his papa's kepi. Then he asks if he can draw a chicken. The answer is yes, of course. So now the banner has a rebel chicken, beady-eyed and marching with purpose. Laughter follows every stitch. The hours pass with the rhythm of thread and memory. Someone brings lemonade. Someone else sings. It's less like labor and more like time travel, moving through sorrow and pride, loss and invention, all at once. You look up and realize more people have joined, not just from your street, but from the next town over. Someone brought a sash-turned-curtain valance. Another offers an apron once used to carry peaches to market. All of it goes into the banner. Miss Nella adds a last piece, a corner patch made from a Union flag's white stripe and a Confederate sash's red edge. "Let 'em meet," she says, sewing slowly. "Let 'em argue forever, side by side." Historians still argue about these hybrid flags, banners, and quilts made in Reconstruction communities. Were they meant to mock, to reconcile, to record? The answer may not matter. Because this is yours. Before sundown, the banner is lifted, gently, slowly, and tacked to the front wall of the schoolhouse. It stretches wide, uneven, perfect in its imperfection. A map of everything you've reimagined. People stand quietly, hands folded, some misty-eyed. Others just nod. And then a child points and says, "Look, that's my shirt." Laughter ripples through the crowd. That breaks the spell. Jonah leans close and says, "Next time we build a barn, let's use old belts and prayer." You tell him, "Just make sure we sew windows in." That night, you pass the schoolhouse again, walking slow beneath a thickening sky. The banner flaps once, catching a breeze, then settles back into stillness. You pause, place your hand against the wood just beneath it, and close your eyes, not in grief, not in pride, just in acknowledgement. You carry so much now, buttons, scraps, stories, and stitches. But it doesn't feel heavy. It feels earned. And maybe that's all history really is. Not what was left behind, but what you choose to carry forward. The next morning begins with a knock. Not a loud one, just two soft taps and a pause. You open the door to find Pastor Elijah standing there, hat in hand, looking more sheepish than usual. His coat is neatly pressed, his shoes shine, but what catches your eye is a bundle under his arm, wrapped in plain muslin. Worn corners peeking out. "I heard you fix things," he says. You step aside, let him in, and gesture toward the sewing table. He places the bundle down with the same care someone might give a letter from the front lines. "I need a favor," he says, "and I need you to not laugh. You promise nothing." He unwraps the cloth, revealing a Confederate frock coat, long, stiff, a little too intact. You blink. He raises both hands. "It was my father's. Wore it after the war, not as pride, but out of poverty. He patched it with whatever he had. Cornmeal sacks, feed bags, bits of scripture tucked in the cuffs." He lifts the sleeve. Sure enough, there's a tiny piece of parchment sewn inside, bearing Psalm 126. He wore it until the day he died. Elijah says, and then I put it in a trunk and tried to forget. You understand. So, he continues, I want it turned into something else. Something that speaks. You ask, What do you want to say? He thinks, then shrugs. Hope, maybe. Humor. Maybe a little shame, stitched honest. You nod. You take the coat in your hands. It's heavier than it looks. Not from fabric weight, but from what it's seen. You turn it over, inspect the seams, run your fingers along the collar where a rank once sat proudly. You decide, then and there, it'll be a coat no more. It'll become a jacket of stories. You sketch a plan. First, shorten it. Remove the long tails and cut a curve into back so it moves easier. Then, line it with bright scraps from the community quilt project. Inside out, it'll carry everyone. On the outside, the gray will remain but softened. Reworked lapels. New cuffs. A breast pocket embroidered with 3 simple words. We remember forward. You begin work immediately. As you cut the bottom hem, a puff of dust rises, and you hear Elijah whisper, "He used to keep tobacco in there." You both laugh. Later, you discover something folded into the inner lining, a tiny cloth pouch. You open it carefully and find 3 things: a thimble, a button with no holes, and a clipping of hair, silver and thin. You don't ask questions. You just return it gently. By sunset, the garment has begun to change. You remove the old insignia and replace it with a single stitch star, not for rank, but for direction. A reminder that stars led many to freedom long before papers did. The back panel gets a diagonal strip of indigo cloth, sewn like lightning across a storm. Elijah insists on adding a patch from his own childhood shirt, bright green gingham, right over the heart. This way, he says, he and I walk together, but not in the same footsteps. Historians still argue whether descendants of Confederate soldiers who were black. Yes, there were some chose to preserve or erase those items. Some destroyed them. Others buried them. Some kept them in closets, stitched in silence. What's certain is that whatever they did, it mattered more than the cloth itself. You finish the jacket just before nightfall. Elijah tries it on. It fits, in that imperfect way that memory always does. Tight in some places, loose in others, but altogether wearable. He turns once, slowly, arms out, then grins. I look ridiculous. You shake your head. You look like history learned how to smile. He doesn't say anything for a while, just runs his hand along the lapel, pausing where the new star sits. He whispers a prayer, not for the past, but for the next child who'll ask why a preacher wears a patched gray coat to a wedding. And the answer, you hope, will be something like, because some stories don't fit into books. They need shoulders to carry them. When Elijah leaves, coat folded gently over his arm, you sit back in your chair and exhale. Your hands are sore. Your eyes sting from a lamplight. But your spirit feels light. You didn't just tailor a coat today. You transformed a confession into armor. It's been nearly 2 weeks since you finished the preacher's coat, and the town hasn't stopped talking. Some call it the gray gospel, others the sermon jacket. Every time Elijah wears it, whether he's marrying a couple beneath the oak trees or simply buying flour from the mill, someone stops and asks, and every time he smiles and says something different. It's a patchwork prayer. It's what my daddy left me and what I'm leaving better, or your favorite. It's fashionably unfinished, like all of us. But today, something's different. Something's brewing. You sense in the way people walk. Shoulders pull back, steps more deliberate. There's a whisper on the wind, threading its way through porches and doorways and fence posts. You stop Jonah on the road. What's going on? He grins. They're calling a gathering. Big one. Down at the courthouse. Why? He shrugs. Some say it's a quilt. Others say it's time we take our stitching somewhere louder. You follow him, boots kicking up little puffs of dry dirt. Along the way, more folks join, Mabel with her patched apron, the twins and their teal kepis, Josiah holding Button Man like a tiny general. Even the baker's mule is there, still draped in gray and carrying a small crate of lemon biscuits. When you arrive, the courthouse steps are full, not just with neighbors, but with newcomers from nearby towns, drawn here by word of mouth, by stories traded in markets and stitched into shawls. Someone unfurls a community banner, pinning it across the railing. It hangs like a living tapestry. Stitched names, dates, jokes, scars. One square simply reads, "We chose to stay." A hush falls. Then Miss Nella steps forward. She clears her throat. Not for drama, just so she won't be drowned out by birdsong. "We've mended," she says. "We've burned. We've laughed. But now we show." She lifts her hands. "We show what we did with the pieces." And with that, the parade begins. Not a parade like you've ever seen. No brass band. No horses in armor. No floats shaped like cornucopias. This one stitched. People walk in coats made from old uniforms, dyed every color defiance. Children carry banners made of handkerchiefs, each with a drawing or phrase. Let them watch, born from thread. Gray is just a background. A man leads a goat wearing a vest. A woman waves a flag that reads, "Rewritten." And there in the center is Elijah in his gospel coat, slow, proud, grinning like the sun's finally where it belongs. You walk near the back, beside Jonah and the baker's wife. Your vest feels snug today, not tight, but full. Full of heat, of motion, of story. A journalist from Austin scribbles notes, eyes wide. "Is this protest?" he asks you. "No," you say. "This is proof." Historians still argue whether such displays happened this openly. Some say black communities kept their resistance subtle, quiet, behind closed doors. Others insist there were marches, songs, quilts, and bonfires all along, just too easily ignored. But today, the town cannot be ignored. The sheriff, a man who's kept mostly quiet since the war, stands on the courthouse porch, arms folded. You watch his eyes move across the banner, the crowd, the stitched slogans. His mouth doesn't move, but he doesn't step in either. He just watches. And in a way, that's a victory too. The parade winds down at the old schoolhouse, where the children gather beneath the stitched flag and sing a song no one taught them. But all of them seem to know. It has no real chorus, no fixed rhythm, just verses made of names, places, fabrics, and lines like, "We stitched the storm and wore it bright. We turned their night into our light." People clap, hum, weep quietly. The sun begins to lower itself, blushing pink behind the trees. Someone lights a lantern, then another, and before long, the field glows. And you sit beside your vest, your kepi pouch, your stitch kit resting beside your knee. You've never felt this kind of tired. It's not exhaustion. It's arrival. You think of all the uniforms you unmade, the buttons you buried, the children who saluted chickens, the preachers who sewed scripture into sleeves, the women who laughed over lemon balm and regret. And you realize this isn't the end. This is the part where the past stops whispering what was and starts listening to what could be. The next morning, you wake to stillness. No distant hammering. No thread being pulled through fabric. No goat in a vest parading across the yard. Just birdsong, wind, and the gentle hush of a town that finally exhaled. Your vest hangs on the back of a chair, its red trim catching the early light. You don't put on today. Not because you're ashamed, far from it, but because some stories deserve a rest. Even patchwork tales need to breathe. Instead, you sit by the window and hold a scrap of gray cloth in your hand. It's soft now, thinner than it used to be, a corner from the very first Confederate jacket you repurposed. It's faded the color of weathered stone and carries the scent of cedar, fire, and the faintest trace of lemon oil from Miss Nella's hands. You decide to keep it. Not to wear. Not to sew. Just to remember. You walk through town as if tracing a seam across a quilt. Past the schoolhouse, where the banner still flutters. Faded slightly but proud. Past the general store, where someone's posted a sign that reads, "Quilt classes Tuesdays. All hands welcome." And past the preacher's house, where Elijah's watering his garden in the gospel coat, now patched with a few clumsy kid stitches, and one tiny footprint sewn in red thread. He waves. You wave back. You stop by the sycamore tree, where a new wooden bench has been placed, crafted from old church pews, carved with the words, "We were not leftovers. We were beginnings." You sit there a while. Josiah runs past with Button Man, now missing both feet, 3 buttons, and sporting a new felt hat clearly stolen from another toy. You laugh, and he laughs louder. People pass. Some wave. Others just nod. Because they know you helped stitch something that didn't exist before. A community quilted from memory, mischief, mourning, and resilience. A parade of the repurposed. A gospel of defiance softened by love. Historians will never catalog the exact day the town turned its pain into pageantry, its anger into aprons, its shame into shawls. There won't be a monument, no plaque, no headline, but in this place there is proof, in every thread, in every button sewn not for war, but for warmth, in every child who marches, salutes a goat, and grows up knowing that even the ugliest cloth can become beautiful if you're bold enough to cut it, stitch it, and call it yours. And now, as the sun sets behind the schoolhouse roof and the sky fades from peach to violet, you return home one last time. You fold your vest carefully. You hang your kepi pouch by the door. You light a single lantern, just bright enough to read your stitches. And then you breathe, slow, easy, deep, because the story is stitched. And it holds. Now let your shoulders settle. Let your breath grow long and slow, like the final thread being tied in the corner of a quilt. The story is quieted. The fabric rests. Outside your window, the trees sway softly, just enough to make the shadows dance across your walls. You can still hear a few echoes. Laughter and parade, a hymn under the sycamore, the rustle of that gray cloth finally folding into peace. Feel how far you've come. From ashes and bonfires to button chimes and stitch flags. From silence that stung to stories that sing. Every piece of this journey, every crooked seam, every scavenged scrap, has become part of something whole. Not perfect, but honest, and stronger than anything sewn in hate. And maybe that's the point, that even history's heaviest threads can be carried with grace if we choose to stitch with love instead of fear. So as you close your eyes tonight, picture the banner waving in the golden light. Picture the children laughing, the preacher grinning, and the vest hanging gently on a hook by the door. You're safe here. You're part of the pattern now. Sleep soft, wrapped in the knowledge that even the smallest stitches can hold the world together. Good night.